The fluorescent lights of the supermarket hummed a merciless tune, buzzing in time with the frantic pounding in Clara's chest. Each item on the conveyor belt felt like a stone pulling her deeper into an ocean of shame. A small can of baby formula, a carton of eggs, a loaf of bread, a single apple for her daughter, Lily. It was a pathetic collection, a testament to just how far she had fallen. "That will be $23.41, the cashier said, her voice flat and bored. Clara's hand trembled as she inserted her debit card into the chip reader. She held her breath, reciting a silent, desperate prayer that she knew would go unanswered. The machine beeped, a shrill, accusing sound. "Declined." "Could you try it again?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her face burned with heat. The cashier sighed, a puff of irritation, and ran the card again. The same piercing beep, the same damning word on the tiny screen. "Declined." "There's no money on it, ma'am," the cashier stated, pulling the card out and setting it on the counter as if it were contaminated. "Mommy, I'm hungry," Lily whimpered from the cart, her small voice cutting through the fog of Clara's humiliation. She was only 3, too young to understand the complex terror of poverty, but old enough to feel the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. Tears pricked at the corners of Clara's eyes. She turned to her daughter, her heart fracturing. She brushed a stray curl from Lily's forehead, her touch gentle despite the tremor in her fingers. "I know, sweetie. I know." She looked back at the meager pile of groceries, at the formula that was a necessity, not a luxury. Then she met her daughter's wide, questioning eyes and spoke the most painful words she had ever uttered. "We have no money, honey. We can't get it today." Lily's lower lip began to tremble, and a small sob escaped. The sound was a physical blow, knocking the last of the air from Clara's lungs. The people in line behind her were shifting, their impatience a palpable force. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. "I'll take care of it," a deep voice said from behind her. Clara flinched, turning to see a man she hadn't noticed before. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit that seemed ludicrously out of place among the linoleum floors and stacked soda displays. His features were sharp, his jaw firm, but it was his eyes that held her. They were a cool, assessing shade of blue, yet they held a flicker of something she couldn't name. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, something more intense. Before she could protest, he stepped forward, placing his own credit card on the counter. "Ring up her items," he told the cashier. Then he did something that made Clara's mind go completely blank. He reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a slim leather wallet, and laid a thick stack of $100 bills on the counter next to his card. It was a staggering amount of cash. "And this is for her trouble," he said, his voice a low rumble. The cashier's eyes widened, her boredom instantly replaced by awe. She fumbled with the bills, her fingers suddenly clumsy. "Sir, this is $10,000. Clara stared at the money, then at the man. Her shock morphed into a defensive wave of pride. "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "No, I can't accept that. I don't know you." The man's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. He looked past her, at Lily, whose sobs had quieted into curious hiccups. "My name is Julian Vance," he said, his eyes returning to Clara. "And it seems to me that you and your daughter could use a little help. Please allow me." "I don't take charity," Clara insisted, her cheeks flaming. She began gathering her empty, reusable bags, ready to flee. The groceries, the money, the man's piercing stare, it was all too much. "It isn't charity," he countered smoothly. "Consider it an advance." Clara froze, her hand hovering over a bag. "An advance for what?" "A job. I'm hiring," he said, his tone as matter-of-fact as if they were in a boardroom instead of the express checkout lane. "My company, Vance Industries, is in need of a detail-oriented analyst in our finance department. The resume you posted on LinkedIn last week was impressive. You have a degree in accounting and 5 years of experience with a top firm before you took time off." The world tilted on its axis. He knew who she was. He had looked her up. This wasn't a random act of kindness. It was something else entirely, something calculated. Her suspicion, which had been a small spark, roared into a wildfire. "How do you know that? Have you been following me?" A flicker of something, regret, perhaps, crossed his face. "My head of human resources flags promising candidates. Your profile came across my desk this morning." The name, it caught my attention. Seeing you here was a coincidence, but one I couldn't ignore. The position is real. The offer is real. $65,000 a year to start, full benefits. He gestured to the pile of cash. This is a signing bonus. To help you get settled. To make sure, his voice dropped slightly. To make sure Lily has everything she needs. He had said her daughter's name. The sound of it from this stranger's lips sent a chill down her spine. It felt too intimate, too presumptuous. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to protect her daughter from this man whose generosity felt more like a trap than a gift. But then she looked at the can of formula. She felt the eviction notice folded in her pocket, its sharp edges a constant, pressing reminder of her failure. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. "Why?" she asked, her voice raw. "Why would you do this for a complete stranger?" Julian Vance held her gaze, and for a moment, the powerful CO vanished, replaced by a man who looked profoundly weary, haunted by a sorrow she couldn't comprehend. "Because no mother should ever have to tell her child she has no money for food," he said softly. "My assistant will contact you tomorrow with the details. Please, just take the money." For her. He nodded once to the stunned cashier, who finished the transaction with his card, and then he was gone, disappearing through the automatic doors as quietly as he had appeared. Clara was left standing there, staring at a pile of money larger than she had seen in her entire life, her heart a chaotic symphony of terror, suspicion, and a fragile, terrifying sliver of hope. The next morning, a black car arrived at her rundown apartment building. The driver, a polite man in a crisp suit, handed her an envelope. Inside was a key card, a formal employment contract from Vance Industries, and a cashier's check for the first month's rent on a fully furnished two-bedroom apartment in a safe, clean neighborhood across town. The contract was exactly as Julian had described. The salary was more than she had made, even before she left her career to care for Lily. Clara read through the documents a dozen times, searching for the catch, the hidden clause that would explain this bizarre turn of events. There was none. It was all straightforward, legitimate, and utterly unbelievable. Her mind raced. Was this some elaborate scam? Was Julian Vance some kind of predator, luring her in with money and the promise of security? The thought made her stomach clench with fear. She spent the day in a state of high alert, peering out her window at every passing car, her phone clutched in her hand. The promise call came at precisely 2 o'clock. A woman with a warm, professional voice introduced herself as Maria, Julian Vance's executive assistant. She walked Clara through the onboarding process, explained the moving company that had been arranged, and confirmed her start date for the following Monday. It was all seamless, efficient, and terrifyingly real. Clara's first week at Vance Industries was a blur. The office was a gleaming tower of glass and steel, a world away from her cramped, crumbling apartment. Her new desk overlooked the city, a sprawling vista of power and wealth. Her colleagues were professional, if a little distant, clearly aware that she was the CEO's mysterious new hire. She kept her head down, determined to prove that she deserved to be there, that she wasn't just some charity case. She poured all her focus into her work, her accounting skills sharp and ready after years of dormancy. She saw Julian only in passing. He would nod at her in the hallway, his expression unreadable, before disappearing into his corner office. He never mentioned the supermarket. He never mentioned the money. He treated her like any other employee, yet she felt his eyes on her constantly. It wasn't a predatory gaze, but it was watchful, an unnerving, silent observation that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The apartment was a sanctuary. For the first time in years, Lily had her own room, painted a soft yellow and filled with new toys that had appeared one afternoon with a note that simply read, "Welcome home." Clara knew they were from Julian. This quiet, persistent generosity was more unsettling than any demand would have been. He was weaving a web of obligation around her, and she didn't know why. After a month, the pressure became unbearable. She had paid her debts, Lily was thriving in a new daycare, and she was excelling at her job. By all accounts, her life had been saved. But the unanswered question of why gnawed at her, eroding the fragile peace she had found. She couldn't live in this state of indebted uncertainty any longer. One evening, she stayed late, waiting until the office had emptied out. Taking a deep breath, she walked to the top floor and knocked on the heavy oak door of his office. "Come in," his voice called out. Julian was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering city lights. He turned as she entered, his expression calm. "Clara, is everything all right?" "No," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. She closed the door behind her. "Nothing is all right. I need to know why you're doing this." All of this, she gestured around at the opulent office, a symbol of the world he had pulled her into. The job, the apartment, the money. No one is that generous without a reason. "What do you want from me?" He didn't seem surprised by her confrontation. He simply motioned to one of the leather chairs opposite his desk. "Please sit down." Clara remained standing, her arms crossed over her chest. "I'll stand. I want an answer, Mr. Vance." A sad smile touched his lips. "My name is Julian, and you deserve an answer." He walked over to his desk, but didn't sit. He leaned against it, creating a semblance of informality, though the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. He hesitated for a long moment, as if gathering the strength to speak. "You're right," he began, his voice low and strained. "It wasn't just a random act. When I saw you in the store, I heard you call your daughter's name. Lily." He said the name softly, as if it were a fragile piece of glass. "My daughter's name was Lily, too." Clara's defensive posture faltered. She saw a profound, ancient grief wash over his features, carving new lines of pain around his eyes. She whispered. He nodded, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond the window. 5 years ago, my wife, Eleanor, and our Lily were in a car accident. Lily was only 6 months old. His voice broke, and he paused to compose himself. The silence in the room was heavy with unspoken tragedy. Eleanor survived. My Lily, she didn't. The air left Clara's lungs. She sank into the chair he had offered, her own anger and suspicion dissolving into a wave of pure, aching empathy. "I'm so sorry," she breathed. "After the accident," he continued, his voice thick with emotion, "my world fell apart. Eleanor and we couldn't overcome the grief. We lost each other after we lost her. I buried myself in my work. I built this company into an empire, but it was all just a distraction. For 5 years, I've just been existing, not living." He finally looked at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "That day in the supermarket, I heard you say her name. I saw the panic in your eyes, the same desperation I saw in my own wife's face when she struggled with being a new mother. And I saw your Lily, so full of life. It was like the universe was giving me a second chance. Not to get my daughter back, nothing can do that, but to help. To make sure another mother and another little girl named Lily would be safe and secure. To do for you what I wish I could have done better for my own family." His confession hung in the air between them, raw and heartbreakingly vulnerable. This wasn't a powerful billionaire manipulating her. This was a grieving father trying to heal an incurable wound. All the fear and suspicion she had harbored washed away, replaced by a profound understanding. "Julian," she said, her own voice thick with tears, "you didn't have to do all this. You could have just paid for the groceries. That would have solved your problem for a day," he said, shaking his head. "I wanted to solve it for a lifetime. It wasn't about the money. It was about giving you the foundation you needed to stand on your own. You're the one doing the work, Clara. You're brilliant at your job. I just opened a door. You're the one walking through it." From that night on, everything changed. The invisible wall between them crumbled. A tentative friendship began to grow, nurtured by late nights at the office working on projects and quiet conversations over coffee. He would ask about Lily, his face lighting up when Clara shared a funny story or a new picture. She, in turn, learned about the man behind the CEO title, his love for old books, his surprising knowledge of astronomy, the deep well of sadness that still resided just beneath his calm exterior. Their professional collaboration became a powerful partnership. Clara's sharp eye for detail uncovered several inconsistencies in the company's third-quarter reports. At first, she thought they were simple errors, but as she dug deeper, a pattern emerged. Small amounts of money were being funneled through a series of shell corporations. It was subtle, sophisticated, and deeply alarming. She brought her findings to Julian. He studied the spreadsheets she had prepared, his expression growing grim. "I know this signature," he said, pointing to a falsified authorization form. "It belongs to Marcus Thorne, my chief operating officer." Marcus was a charismatic and ambitious executive, a man Julian had once considered a friend. The betrayal was a fresh wound on top of old scars. He's been with the company for a decade, Julian said, his voice laced with disbelief and anger. Why would he do this? It looks like he's been doing it for at least 2 years, Clara said softly. The amounts have been getting larger. He's getting bolder. As they began their own quiet investigation, Marcus must have sensed the net closing in. He grew hostile, making pointed remarks about Clara's sudden rise in the company during meetings. He saw her proximity to Julian as a threat to his position and his secret enterprise. He decided to act first. One Monday morning, Julian was summoned to an emergency board meeting. Clara was called in moments later. She walked into the boardroom to find a dozen pairs of eyes fixed on her, cold and accusatory. Marcus stood at the head of the table, a smug look on his face. "We have uncovered a significant case of embezzlement," Marcus announced, his voice ringing with false authority. "Funds have been systematically siphoned from the company. Our investigation has traced the transactions back to a series of newly created accounts." He clicked a button, and a projection appeared on the screen behind him. It was a complex web of financial data, but at the center of it, highlighted in red, was Clara's name. The accounts were opened a month ago, shortly after Mr. Vance hired Miss Evans. The evidence is undeniable. A wave of nausea washed over Clara. The transactions were fabricated, the data expertly manipulated to frame her. It was her word against the COOs. She was the newcomer, the charity case. She looked at Julian, her heart pounding with fear. Julian's face was a mask of cold fury. He stood up, his presence commanding the room. "This is a lie," he stated, his voice dangerously calm. "Marcus is the one who has been stealing from this company, and he is trying to frame an innocent woman to cover his tracks." The board members shifted uncomfortably. "Julian, the evidence," one of them began. "The evidence has been manufactured," Julian cut in. "Clara, in fact, is the one who discovered the initial discrepancies. Over the past week, we have been gathering our own evidence." This was it. Clara knew it was her moment. All the fear she felt was overshadowed by a fierce determination not to let this man destroy the life she had just begun to build. She stepped forward, her hand steady as she placed her own laptop on the table and connected it to the projector. "Mr. Thorne is a very clever man," she began, her voice clear and confident. "He used encrypted servers and layers of shell companies to hide his activities. What he didn't count on was that I spent 2 years auditing precisely these kinds of fraud cases at my previous firm." She brought up her own presentation. With meticulous precision, she dismantled Marcus's web of lies, one piece of data at a time. She showed the board the original, unaltered transaction logs. She revealed the digital footprints Marcus had tried to erase, tracking the IP addresses of the transfers back to a computer in his home office. Her final slide showed a recent wire transfer of $5 million from one of the shell companies to a private, offshore account in Marcus's name. It was the kill shot. The boardroom was silent, the only sound the soft hum of the projector. Marcus's face had drained of all color. He was trapped, his scheme exposed with irrefutable proof. "Security," Julian said, his voice like ice. "Escort Mr. Thorne from the building. The police are on their way." As security guards entered and took a stunned Marcus by the arm, the boardroom erupted in apologies and praise for Clara. She barely heard them. All she could focus on was the look of immense pride and relief on Julian's face. Later that evening, after the chaos had subsided, they stood together in his office, the city lights twinkling below like a sea of fallen stars. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a profound sense of emotional exhaustion and a deep, unspoken connection. "You saved my company," Julian said, turning to face her. "You saved me." "We saved each other," she corrected softly. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. His touch was warm, sending a jolt of electricity through her. "Clara," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she now recognized as love. "These past few months, working with you, getting to know you and Lily. It's the first time I've felt truly alive since the accident. You've brought light back into my world." Tears welled in her eyes as she leaned into his touch. "You did the same for me, Julian. You saw me when I was invisible. I see you now," he said, his gaze intense. "And I don't ever want to stop looking at you." He lowered his head and kissed her, a kiss that was filled with all the grief, gratitude, and burgeoning hope that had brought them together. It wasn't the fiery kiss of a new romance, but something deeper, more meaningful, a promise of healing, of family, of a future built from the ashes of their pasts. 1 year later, the autumn sun cast long shadows across the park. The air was crisp with the scent of fallen leaves. Clara sat on a bench, a contented smile on her face as she watched Julian push a giggling Lily on the swings. Higher and higher she went, her laughter echoing through the quiet afternoon. So much had changed. The small, furnished apartment had been replaced by a beautiful home with a backyard. Clara was no longer an analyst. She was the chief financial officer of Vance Industries, her position earned through skill and hard work. Julian's board had unanimously approved her promotion after Marcus's betrayal came to light. But the biggest change was the one in her heart. The fear and uncertainty that had once been her constant companions were gone, replaced by a deep and abiding sense of peace and security. She looked at the man pushing her daughter on the swing, not as a billionaire CEO, but as her partner, her friend, the man she loved. On her left hand, a simple, elegant diamond ring caught the afternoon light. Julian slowed the swing and scooped Lily into his arms, carrying her over to the bench. Lily scrambled onto Clara's lap, her small arms wrapping around her neck in a fierce hug. "I love you, Mommy," she mumbled into Clara's shoulder. "I love you too, sweetie," Clara whispered back, her heart overflowing. Julian sat down beside her, his arm wrapping around her shoulders, pulling her and Lily into his embrace. They sat there for a long moment, a perfect, complete picture of a family. "What are you thinking about?" Julian asked softly, his lips brushing against her hair. Clara looked from her laughing daughter to the loving man beside her. She thought back to that awful day in the supermarket, a moment of such profound shame and desperation that she had thought her life was over. She remembered the crushing weight of failure, the agonizing words, "We have no money." She had felt so utterly alone, so hopeless. "I was just thinking," she said, her voice filled with wonder, "about how the worst moment of my entire life led me directly to the very best one.